I always thought the world would stop, at least for a moment, when you lose your only child. But the truth is, the world keeps spinning, completely indifferent to your grief. On the morning of my son Michael's funeral, I stood by his casket in a chilly spring wind in Cleveland, Ohio. My hands trembled as I held the funeral program. The last time I'd seen Michael smile was months ago, before cancer took away everything but his dignity. Next to me, his wife, now my former daughter-in-law, stood in her expensive black coat, one of the dozens Michael had bought for her during their 10 years together. Her name is Stephanie, and if you ever met her, you'd think she was born for high society. Always polished, always perfect, but her heart colder than the Ohio winter. She scrolled through her phone at the graveside, as if this moment was just another tedious meeting to be endured. I couldn't hold my tongue. "Stephanie," I said, my voice raw, "we just buried my son. Show a little respect." She didn't look up. She just smirked, tapping her phone. "Your son? Michael was my husband, Frank. And now, everything he worked for, everything, is mine." She practically spat the words, her voice loud enough for the gathered mourners to hear. You see, Stephanie had always made it clear she was done playing the grieving wife. But hearing it here, beside my son's grave, cut deeper than I ever imagined. Our friends from the neighborhood, Michael's business partners, even the local pastor, they all watched the scene unfold, some in shock, others in uncomfortable silence. I gripped the funeral program tighter, my old engineer's mind racing with emotions I wasn't used to feeling: anger, grief, disbelief. I remembered when Michael was a little boy, building model airplanes with me in our garage, painting them the brightest colors just because he liked to be different. He grew up into a man who built his own company from scratch, a tech startup called NextSync, right here in the Midwest. He was proud, creative, and above all, he was kind. How he ended up married to someone like Stephanie, I'll never know. After the last mourners drifted away, I was left alone with my memories. Stephanie didn't shed a tear. She didn't even glance back at the grave as she strutted off to her silver Lexus, one more gift from my son. I wondered if Michael, wherever he was now, could see any of this. Would he be disappointed, or had he always suspected the truth about his wife? I wanted to believe he was just too good-hearted to see her for what she was. When I finally left the cemetery, Stephanie was waiting by the car. "We need to talk about your living situation," she said, tossing me a set of keys and a folder. Inside was a copy of a rental agreement Michael had apparently signed months before. According to the fine print, I'd only been a tenant in my son's house. Now that he was gone, my lease was over. "You've got 30 minutes to get your things," she told me coldly. "If you're still here after that, I'll call the police." I was 67 years old, and on the day I buried my only child, I was thrown out onto the street by a woman I'd cared for like my own daughter. My entire life now fit into 3 suitcases, some clothes, a few books, and the small box of model airplanes Michael and I built together. I drove away from the only home I'd known for the past year, watching the Cleveland skyline disappear in my rearview mirror. I spent that first night in a rundown motel off the interstate, staring at the ceiling and wondering what would happen next. All I had was a business card from Michael's attorney, a man named Leonard Brown, and a promise from my son. "Dad, I'll take care of you. Trust Leonard." The next morning, desperate and exhausted, I called Leonard. He listened quietly as I told him everything. "Frank," he said, "come to my office tomorrow morning." Michael left very detailed instructions. He was more prepared than you realize. That night, alone in my motel room, I clung to that hope. Maybe, just maybe, my son had planned for this. Maybe he saw something in Stephanie I never could. I closed my eyes, remembering Michael's voice. "Trust Leonard. Tomorrow." I would find out if my son's last promise was more than just words. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, my back aching from the motel's lumpy mattress and my mind replaying the last words Michael ever said to me. I could almost hear him say, "Trust Leonard." That phrase became my only anchor as I drove through the misty Cleveland streets, clutching the business card of Leonard Brown, attorney at law. Leonard's office was on the 19th floor of a glass tower downtown. The receptionist, her name tag said Allison, welcomed me with a smile that tried to hide her pity. "Mr. Bennett? Mr. Brown is expecting you. Conference room B." Leonard was nothing like the stuffy lawyers I'd seen on TV. He looked to be in his early 50s, with sandy hair going gray at the temples and the calm patience of someone who'd seen a lifetime of family feuds. "Frank, come in. I'm sorry for your loss. Michael always spoke highly of you." He poured us both a cup of black coffee, strong, no sugar, just the way I like it. "I understand Stephanie's been difficult," he said gently. "But Michael made very careful plans. He anticipated almost everything." He began laying out documents, reading glasses perched on his nose. "First things first, Michael's will. The formal reading is this Friday, 2 p.m. Stephanie will be there. Her attorney as well. But you, Frank, are a primary beneficiary." I stared stunned. "Beneficiary? She told me I was just a tenant, that I'd get nothing." Leonard smiled faintly. "Michael was always 3 steps ahead. He left instructions that protect you. And," he paused, shuffling papers, "he left a video. He wanted you and Stephanie to watch it together, during the official reading." Just then, my phone buzzed. "Stephanie." I let it ring. The memory of her tossing me out the day of my son's funeral was still too raw. Leonard continued, "Until the reading, I recommend you stay at the motel or find another temporary place. Don't try to go back to the house. Legally, Stephanie's within her rights for now, but that could change." My mind reeled. I'd gone from respected grandfather to homeless in a day, but suddenly, hope returned. Michael hadn't abandoned me, not even in death. That afternoon, I checked my dwindling savings. Social Security and a small pension wouldn't last long. I wandered the city, letting the noise and chaos of Cleveland distract me from the gaping hole in my chest. Every alley and diner reminded me of times with Michael, buying him his first Indian's cap, getting burgers at Rick's Diner, even the hardware store where we built our last model plane. I returned to the motel as dusk settled over the city. The place reeked of old carpet and fried chicken from the takeout next door. I kept replaying memories of my son, my wife long gone, and now, the echo of a family destroyed by greed. Friday came fast. I dressed in my best suit, the only one left, wrinkled from being jammed in a suitcase. The sky was gunmetal gray as I walked into Leonard's conference room. Stephanie was already there, flanked by her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Porter. Stephanie barely looked at me. She wore a charcoal suit and a look of smug satisfaction, her manicured hands tapping out texts on her iPhone. Rachel Porter was already assembling documents and reviewing notes. Leonard called the meeting to order. "Today, we'll formally read Michael Bennett's last will and testament." He pressed a button, and a small camera on the table began recording. He spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Present are Frank Bennett, father and beneficiary, Stephanie Bennett, surviving spouse, Rachel Porter, attorney for Mrs. Bennett." I sat at the end of the table, my hands trembling just a little. I couldn't help thinking how Michael would have hated this. He valued loyalty, not money. But money was all that mattered to Stephanie. Leonard began reading. "I, Michael Joseph Bennett, being of sound mind and body, do hereby establish this as my final will and testament. To my beloved wife, Stephanie Bennett, I leave the family home at 209 Sycamore Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio, all vehicles registered in my name, and all bank accounts at Great Lakes National Bank." Stephanie's lips curled into a satisfied half-smile. I could see her calculating her next steps, already spending the inheritance. Leonard continued. To my father, Frank Bennett, who cared for me during my illness and supported me in every chapter of my life, I leave 50% ownership of NextSync Technologies, including all shares, voting rights, and dividend distributions, valued at approximately $35 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. Stephanie's jaw dropped. Rachel Porter looked up, genuinely surprised for the first time. But Leonard wasn't done. Additionally, Frank Bennett is to receive the entire contents of the workshop, all tools, and the model plane collection, to be relocated to a property of his choosing. Stephanie tried to interrupt, her voice tight. This is a joke. He can't just give you half the company. That's not how this works. Leonard met her gaze. Mrs. Bennett, please let me finish. There are additional clauses. He paused, looking at me with something almost like a secret smile. Suddenly, I realized what Michael meant by trust Leonard. My son hadn't just planned for his death, he had planned for the aftermath, for the storm he knew would come. I looked at Stephanie, whose expression shifted from victory to confusion, and finally, to fear. But the biggest surprise was still to come. The tension in the conference room was sharp enough to cut. Stephanie's perfectly made-up face turned ashen as Leonard flipped to the next page in the will. Rachel, her lawyer, tried to regain her composure, but I could see she hadn't expected this. For a moment, Stephanie seemed lost, then, like a switch flipping, her anger returned. This is absurd, she snapped. Michael was on heavy medication. He wasn't thinking clearly. Frank manipulated him, I'm sure of it. Rachel, tell them we'll contest this. Rachel placed a calming hand on Stephanie's arm. We'll review the will in detail. But let's hear all the provisions first. Leonard, unbothered, pressed a button on the remote. A video screen came to life at the end of the table. The room fell silent as Michael's face appeared, gaunt but familiar, eyes still shining with the stubborn hope that had defined his life. If you're watching this, Dad, Stephanie, it means I'm gone. I hope you both know I love you. But I know things haven't been easy, especially these last 18 months. His gaze shifted to me. Dad, I meant what I said. You gave up your life to take care of me. Now it's my turn to look out for you. Then he turned toward the camera, as if speaking directly to Stephanie. Steph, I hope you remember the good years. But I also know you. If you ever try to force my father out of our home, or if you fail to respect the arrangements in this will, everything, transfers to my dad. The lawyers will know what to do. Stephanie's lips curled in disbelief, but Leonard didn't even pause. The conditional clause is legally binding, he said. If you violate it, all assets, including the house and your shares, go to Mr. Bennett. Rachel shook her head, leafing through the documents. We'll challenge it on mental competency, she murmured. There must be a way. But Stephanie wasn't listening. She stared at the frozen image of Michael on the screen, rage and humiliation warring on her face. You think you've won, old man? I'll make sure you lose everything. You don't belong in our life, or our house. It stung, but I was too tired for anger. I'd spent months by Michael's hospital bed, helping him through every round of chemo, holding his hand during the worst of it. Stephanie had barely been present, always with an excuse, a trip, a meeting, a call. The business, she claimed, had to go on. Michael needed her to be strong, she said. But I saw her strength for what it was, survival, not love. Leonard turned off the video and gathered the documents. That concludes the official reading. Frank, I'll arrange for the company's lawyers to contact you about your shares and voting rights. Stephanie, you'll need to sign a statement acknowledging the terms. Stephanie was already on her feet, grabbing her purse. Don't think this is over. My attorney will be in touch. She stormed out, heels echoing down the marble corridor. Rachel followed, gathering files with the brisk efficiency of a woman who knew this was about to become a long, bitter fight. After they left, Leonard poured another cup of coffee and sat beside me. "You all right, Frank?" I tried to answer, but my throat closed up. Grief, relief, and confusion all tangled together. "He really did it, didn't he?" I whispered. "He protected me, even now." Leonard nodded. "Michael was the most meticulous client I've ever had. He anticipated every possible move Stephanie might make. This will is bulletproof. But you need to be careful. People get desperate when they lose what they thought was theirs." I nodded, feeling every year of my age. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted my son back." Leonard placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "You honored him, Frank. Now honor his wishes. Use what he left you. Build something new. Maybe you could help run the company, or at least keep his legacy alive." The rest of the day passed in a blur. By evening, I was back at the motel, looking out at the city lights and thinking of Michael. The loneliness was immense, but now it was laced with a strange new strength, one born of my son's final act of love. The next week was a whirlwind of legal appointments, phone calls from the company's board, and messages from old friends. Most were kind, some were curious, and a few were openly envious. Stephanie, meanwhile, unleashed a storm of angry calls and texts, threatening lawsuits, accusing me of manipulation, even telling anyone who would listen that I had stolen her future. I avoided the house. It no longer felt like a home, not with Stephanie prowling its halls like a wounded animal. Instead, I met with Tom Carter, Michael's longtime friend and the COO of NextSync. Tom was a solid, steady presence, the kind of man who knew how to keep a company moving even in chaos. "Michael wanted you to be involved, Frank," Tom said over coffee at the company's downtown office. "He left plans for the next 5 years, and he believed you could help keep the team together. You know more about people than any of us." It was a lot to process. Me, an old civil engineer, running a tech company? But Michael had believed in me, and that meant more than I could explain. I spent days learning the ropes, meeting with the young developers Michael had mentored, listening to stories about his wild ideas, late-night pizza runs, and stubborn optimism. Everywhere I turned, I found reminders of my son, his handwriting on white boards, his photo in the break room, even the purple and gold model plane he kept on his desk. One evening, after a long meeting, I found myself alone in Michael's old workshop. The tools gleamed under the fluorescent light, untouched since the last project we started together. On the workbench sat a half-finished plane, its wings painted bright purple, just the way Michael had always liked. I sat down and picked up a brush. There was work to do, and a promise to keep. The nights in Cleveland felt longer now, stretching endlessly as spring drifted towards summer. I spent most evenings in Michael's old workshop, painting and repairing the model planes we built together over the years. Sometimes, I'd just sit there, listening to the city outside, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that had vanished almost overnight. During the day, my new reality was a whirlwind of legal updates, business meetings, and calls from the company board. Leonard, ever the steady hand, managed most of the legal chaos. He kept me informed, but shielded me from the worst of Stephanie's attacks. The day after the will reading, Stephanie filed a challenge, claiming Michael wasn't of sound mind when he wrote the new will. Her lawyer, Rachel, accused Leonard and me of undue influence and began a campaign of threats, court dates, depositions, even rumors in the local press. But Michael's preparations held strong. The video testimony, the doctor's letters, and the meticulous documentation Leonard produced left little doubt about my son's intentions and his mental capacity right until the end. Each challenge Stephanie raised was calmly, methodically dismantled in court. Meanwhile, Tom Carter and the team at NextSync rallied around me. I had always thought of myself as an outsider in Michael's high-tech world, but now, with Tom's help, I started to find my footing. The developers and engineers welcomed me, not because of my business acumen, but because I was Michael's father, and in a way, a living piece of his legacy. They wanted to build on what he'd started, to prove that his vision mattered. It wasn't easy. Stephanie did everything she could to poison the waters, spreading stories about my greed, hinting that I'd manipulated Michael in his final days. A few employees quit, unable to deal with the drama. But for every loss, there was a gain: the loyalty of those who truly believed in the company, and in Michael's values. In court, Stephanie's facade began to crack. Under cross-examination, she couldn't explain why she'd moved Michael's things out of their bedroom before he died, or why she'd emptied some of their joint accounts the week after the funeral. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for cutting through nonsense, saw through the theatrics. During one tense hearing, Stephanie's anger exploded. "This man doesn't deserve a dime," she shouted, pointing at me. "Michael was my husband. He wanted me to have everything." Leonard remained calm, presenting Michael's own words, written and recorded on video, expressing his gratitude for the care I'd given and his explicit wishes for the inheritance. In the end, the judge ruled decisively: the will would stand. Stephanie was entitled only to what Michael had left her, and the conditional clause remained in force. The day of the final ruling, I returned to the house on Sycamore Avenue for the first time since the funeral. The place was eerily quiet. Stephanie had already moved most of her belongings out, leaving behind only traces: a perfume bottle on the vanity, a faded scarf in the closet, the faint smell of her expensive candles. The workshop, however, was untouched, waiting for me. I spent hours there, sorting through the tools Michael had bought, the plans he'd drawn up, and the models we built. Each piece was a memory of Saturday mornings spent tinkering together, of Michael's wild ideas about flight and design, of laughter and stubborn determination. As I packed the planes for transport to my new apartment, I found a small envelope tucked inside the largest toolbox. Michael's handwriting was instantly familiar: "For Dad, open when you're ready." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means things turned out the way I hoped. I know it wasn't easy. I wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of, not just with money, but with purpose. The company will need you, not because you're an engineer, but because you understand people. You always did. You taught me what really matters: kindness, honesty, and finishing what you start. Keep building, Dad. Keep believing. I love you. Michael." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. But for the first time since Michael's death, I felt something beyond grief. I felt hope, a sense that, even through heartbreak, there could be new beginnings. The weeks passed. I moved into a modest apartment near Lakewood, close enough to the company headquarters to walk if the weather was good. Tom visited often, and together we worked late into the night on a new project, an educational grant in Michael's name, aimed at helping kids from working-class families study engineering. It was the kind of thing Michael would have wanted: a way to give back, to build a legacy that outlived both of us. Stephanie's anger gradually faded from my life. Her calls became less frequent. Eventually, she accepted the court's decision and moved to New York, chasing a new beginning of her own. I heard she sold Michael's car, closed the last of their joint accounts, and never once looked back. By midsummer, the company was thriving again. We launched a new version of NextSync's flagship product, and I gave a short speech to the team at the unveiling. I told them about Michael's first model plane, the purple one with the gold wings, and how it crashed more times than it flew, but how he never stopped trying to get it right. "He never let failure stop him," I said, voice steady now. "He believed that every setback was just another step towards something better. That's the spirit we need now, not just as a company, but as people." When I finished, the team applauded, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged, not just as Michael's father, but as someone carrying his torch. That night, I returned to the workshop and put the finishing touches on the last plane Michael and I started. I painted the tail bright purple, just the way he liked it, and hung it above my desk at home. A symbol of love, persistence, and the kind of justice that only a father and son can understand. Summer in Cleveland is different from anywhere else. The city hums with lake breezes and the distant roar of ball games at Progressive Field. But for me, life moved to a new rhythm, a steady beat of business, memory, and healing. By July, most of the dust had settled. I was a fixture at Next Sync, attending board meetings, listening more than talking, but always feeling Michael's presence at my back. The employees warmed to me, often stopping by my office with small problems or family stories. It turned out that, even in a tech company, people needed an old-fashioned listener. Still, not every day was easy. There were times when grief hit like a wave, leaving me winded and raw. Sometimes it came when I least expected it, passing a father and son tossing a baseball in the park, or hearing Michael's favorite song on the radio in a grocery store. There were nights I sat in my new apartment, turning the pages of old photo albums, trying to memorize every detail of my boy's life. Stephanie's shadow lingered, though further away now. She tried once more to contact me, sending a long email filled with accusations and demands. She claimed Michael had been manipulated, that the courts had sided with sentimentality over fairness. She said she deserved more, and that I was an old man clinging to things that never truly belonged to me. For a while, her words stung. But Leonard reminded me that grief and anger often go hand in hand. She lost Michael too, Frank, he told me gently. Some people just can't bear the idea of not being in control. Let her go. So I did. I deleted the email, blocked her number, and stopped looking back. The house on Sycamore was now mine legally, but I left it empty for a few months, not quite ready to move in. Instead, I visited each weekend, tending the garden, fixing little things Michael never had time for, and sitting in the backyard as the sun set behind the garage. Sometimes, Martha Ellis from next door would bring over lemonade, or Tom would swing by after work to talk shop and reminisce. One Saturday, I received a letter in Michael's handwriting, one I hadn't seen before, hidden inside an old copy of The Old Man and the Sea on his bookshelf. It was short, but the words were like a key unlocking something inside me. Dad, if you're reading this, I hope you're sitting in the backyard. I hope you're not too angry at the world. I want you to promise you'll keep building, keep dreaming, and keep loving people, even the ones who don't always deserve it. That's how you raised me. That's how you changed my life. Don't let go of that now. Love, Michael. I read it 3 times, each time feeling a bit lighter. That night, I invited Tom and Martha over for dinner at the empty house. We sat in the kitchen, eating chili and cornbread, telling stories about Michael. There was laughter and a few tears, but mostly there was gratitude for the life he'd lived and the mark he'd left on us. Around that time, the Dennis Bennett Memorial Scholarship Fund launched, thanks to generous support from the company and a few old friends. The first recipients, 2 young women from tough neighborhoods and a boy from rural Ohio, visited the office for a tour. They asked questions about engineering, coding, and entrepreneurship. I saw the same spark in their eyes that Michael once had, and for a moment the world felt new again. As fall approached, life settled into its new shape. I spent more time in the workshop, finishing old projects and starting new ones. The company thrived, with Tom at the helm and me offering advice whenever it was needed. We expanded into educational software, just like Michael had envisioned. Schools from all over the Midwest began using our tools, and the letters from grateful teachers and students filled the halls of Next Sync with a sense of purpose. I started volunteering at a local youth center, helping kids learn basic engineering with old model kits and scrap wood. It wasn't high-tech, but it was honest work, building, creating, fixing things with my hands and passing on what Michael had taught me about never giving up. One crisp October morning, as the leaves blazed gold and red, I decided it was time to move back into the house on Sycamore. I cleaned every room, unpacked the last of my suitcases, and hung Michael's favorite model plane over the fireplace. The house was full of memories, yes, but now it also felt full of hope. It was a home again. The final encounter with Stephanie came unexpectedly, on a rainy afternoon. I found her waiting at the front porch, drenched but determined, holding a cardboard box. "I just want to return this," she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual confidence. "It's some of Michael's old things. Photos, notebooks. I thought you should have them." I invited her in, made her a cup of coffee, and for a while we sat in silence, the years of bitterness settling between us. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry, Frank," she said. "I was angry and scared. I lost him, and I didn't know what to do. But I shouldn't have taken it out on you. You were always good to him." I nodded, not sure what to say. There was nothing left to fight over, nothing to fix. We parted with a quiet handshake, and as she walked away, I realized I felt no anger, only relief. The past was finally in the past. That night, as I watched the lights of Cleveland twinkle beyond my window, I realized I was no longer waiting for life to return to normal. Instead, I was building a new life, one rooted in love, forgiveness, and the quiet pride of a promise kept. Michael's legacy wasn't money or property, or even the company. It was the lives he touched, the love he gave, and the love he left behind. And now, it was up to me to make sure that story continued. Autumn settled in with golden leaves drifting across Sycamore Avenue, and for the first time in years, I felt content. My days fell into a gentle rhythm, morning walks by Lake Erie, afternoons at the youth center, evenings in the workshop. The house, once heavy with grief and tension, now hummed with a quiet peace. At Next Sync, the company grew stronger. Tom Carter had become more than a business partner, he was family now. The board meetings had shifted from anxious debates about the future to celebrations of new contracts, awards for innovation, and even a feature in a national magazine about Michael's vision for accessible technology. Sometimes, when I passed Michael's old office, I'd pause, remembering his laughter, his restless ideas, and that fierce spark in his eyes. But it no longer hurt the way it once did. Instead, it felt like a blessing, a reminder to keep dreaming. One afternoon, I hosted the scholarship recipients and their families at the house. The living room, once a battleground, was filled with laughter and excited chatter. One of the students, a shy girl named Olivia, showed me her notebook full of sketches for an eco-friendly drone. Another, Marcus, had already started building robots from salvaged parts in his garage. As we sat around the table eating homemade apple pie, I found myself telling stories about Michael, how he always colored outside the lines, how he failed as often as he succeeded, but never stopped trying. "That's what matters," I said, my voice steady. "Not that you fall, but that you get up. Every time." Their parents nodded, and I could see in their faces the hope that comes from new beginnings. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the backyard, watching the stars emerge through bare branches, and whispered a quiet thank you to my son. The youth center became a second home. The kids, most from tough neighborhoods, were eager to learn, desperate for attention and encouragement. I taught them how to use power tools, how to draw plans, how to think through problems. We built birdhouses, bridges, and eventually a working windmill that drew praise from the city council. They called me Mr. Frank, and for the first time in a long while, I felt needed in a way I hadn't since Michael was small. Winter crept in with its familiar bite, but inside my workshop there was warmth. Tom and I spent long evenings finishing a restoration of Michael's very first computer, a battered old desktop from the late 90s, now cleaned and shining, a centerpiece in the company's lobby. On the anniversary of Michael's death, the whole staff gathered to dedicate the memorial wall, photos, his favorite quotes, and the purple and gold model plane that had once hung over my desk. After the ceremony, a young engineer approached me. Her name was Cassie, one of Michael's protégés. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice trembling. "I never got to tell you how much Michael meant to me. He gave me my first real chance, when nobody else would. He used to say, 'Don't be afraid to break things, Cassie. That's how you learn to build something better.'" We stood together in silence, surrounded by his legacy, and I felt that sense of purpose blossom again. Michael hadn't just built a company, he'd built a community. He'd built hope. Around Christmas, Martha Ellis hosted a gathering at her house. The neighborhood turned out with casseroles and cookies, and the air was full of music and old stories. For the first time, I didn't dread the holidays. Martha made a toast, raising her glass. "To Frank," she said, "for carrying the torch, and for reminding us all that family means more than blood or paperwork." There was laughter and a few tears, and as I looked around the crowded living room, I realized that family really was what you made it. Some bonds are chosen, others forged in fire. All of them mattered. Stephanie, meanwhile, had faded completely from my life. I heard through Leonard that she'd started over in New York, remarried, and taken a job in real estate. There was no more bitterness, only distance, a chapter closed for good. Sometimes I thought about her and hoped she'd finally found peace of her own. With the new year came new challenges. The company launched an outreach program in Michael's name, sending volunteers to schools and community centers all over Ohio. The kids I worked with at the youth center built their own computers for the first time, each one proudly inscribed with a small brass plaque. "In memory of Michael Bennett, dream bigger." The world moved on, as it always does. But in the quiet moments, in the smell of sawdust, the laughter of children, the hush of early mornings, I felt Michael close, not as a shadow but as a guiding light. My grief had transformed, no longer a wound, but a wellspring. I'd kept my promise. I'd kept building, kept loving, kept going, even when it seemed impossible. On the first warm day of spring, I invited Olivia, Marcus, and the rest of the scholarship kids back to the house for a barbecue. We sat in the backyard, watching kites soar over Sycamore Avenue, and talked about the future. They had plans, big ones. And I, for the first time in a long time, looked forward to what tomorrow would bring. Spring arrived with a softness I hadn't felt in years. The trees along Sycamore Avenue burst into bloom, and the city finally shook off the last chill of winter. My house, Michael's old house, now truly mine, felt lighter, its windows open to the breeze, its rooms alive with new energy. For the first time since my son's funeral, I allowed myself to hope for the future without fear or guilt. The days filled up with meaning. The youth center expanded its programs, and the number of kids showing up every afternoon doubled. We built wind chimes that sang in the April winds, and designed a small greenhouse behind the center, a project Michael would have loved. More than once, I'd look out over the rows of seedlings and imagine him at my side, sleeves rolled up, grinning at the mess we made. At Next Sync, Tom Carter and I watched the company thrive, not just in numbers, but in spirit. The scholarship fund grew. And so did our outreach. We sponsored science fairs, held free classes for parents, even started a summer camp for young engineers. Sometimes I'd stand in the back of a classroom, listening to a dozen voices ask questions about circuits or coding, and I'd catch myself smiling. This was Michael's real inheritance. One afternoon, as I was walking home from the office, I ran into Olivia and Marcus from the scholarship's first class. They were both in college now, home for a visit and full of stories about their classes, their friends, their wild plans for the future. "Mr. Bennett," Olivia said, "I don't think you realize how much this program changed my life. I never thought someone like me could be an engineer, but here I am. And it started here, in your backyard." Marcus nodded, his voice full of quiet pride. "You believed in us before we believed in ourselves." Their words stayed with me as I walked the rest of the way home. That night, I sat in the workshop and wrote Michael a letter, not because I believed he could read it, but because I wanted to mark this moment, to say thank you in my own way. Dear Michael, it's spring again. The house is full of laughter, the company is thriving, and the world feels bright. You always said that hope wasn't something you waited for, it was something you built, one act of kindness at a time. I see that now, in every student, every friend, every small piece of good we managed to do. I hope you're proud. I hope you know I kept my promise. I love you, son. Dad. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, I hung the letter above the workbench, next to the purple and gold model plane. Some nights, when the house was quiet, I'd sit there and remember the sound of Michael's laughter, the feeling of his hand in mine as a little boy, the way he never gave up, even when the odds were against him. I'd learned that love, like justice, wasn't about revenge or keeping score. It was about carrying forward what matters, forgiving what doesn't, and always making room for new beginnings. My life wasn't what I'd planned, but it was full. Rich. Woven with loss, yes, but also with resilience and grace. On the 1-year anniversary of Michael's passing, we held a small ceremony in the garden. Friends, neighbors, coworkers, scholarship students, all gathered under the blossoming trees. Martha Ellis read one of Michael's favorite poems, and Tom spoke about his vision for the future. There were tears, but there was also music, laughter, and the quiet assurance that his story was far from over. After everyone had gone, I stood alone in the yard, hands in my pockets, looking up at the stars as they emerged one by one. I felt an immense peace, a sense that, at last, I was home. Not because of any house or inheritance, but because I'd found a way to keep building, keep loving, keep going. For Michael. For myself. For all the lives that touched and were touched in return. As I turned to go inside, the wind caught the chimes we'd built at the youth center, sending their songs spinning through the night. I paused, smiling. Some promises, I realized, last forever. And in the gentle hush of a Cleveland spring, I was finally, quietly, free.